Jumping into our next guest is Gregory Landua. Hey, how are you? So I just wanted to say a brief second about what you're up to. So Greg is the Chief Regeneration Officer of an organization called Regen Network. And he's also a writer and a longtime worker in regenerative agriculture and consultant and so forth. He wrote a book called Regenerative Enterprise. And so now today we're going to talk about the way that blockchains and other open tools can be used for ecological regeneration on a large scale.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Greg. Really excited about the awesome panels that you've put together.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about, first of all, just tell us about regenerative agriculture. Give a brief overview on regenerative agriculture and the way it's different from the normal agriculture that we see out in the communities like cornfields and wheat fields and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So regenerative agriculture is a way of engaging with agriculture and maybe land use more broadly in a way that actually increases the health, vitality, and viability of the ecosystem, of the soil. So we tend to look at indicators like soil organic carbon, biodiversity, water retention, and we sort of associate an increase in the health of those indicators with the practices that we sort of lump together as regenerative agriculture. And some of those practices include shifting from tillage to no tillage if you're talking about annual crops. They are perennializing and engaging in agroforestry or silvopasture, integrating and rotating animals in ways that instead of overgrazing, you're actually renutrifying the landscape. Okay. And in essence, I would sort of distill regenerative agriculture is farming in a way that sort of synergizes the value extraction in generating calories and medicine and fiber and other things that we need to have in our human civilization in a way that is actively regenerating the sort of base agro-ecosystem that we're interacting with.
Okay, so if we think about agriculture and climate change, agriculture and deforestation, these are all things that we care about now. Yet we continue to, it continues to be difficult to get food that is not grown in a monoculture, that is grown in a way that that doesn't destroy the land, that creates conditions for climate change. But so can you talk a little bit about ecosystem services and what they are and how you can kind of quantify the transition from a monoculture to a robust kind of polyculture and regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first off, I'll just sort of start by framing, currently, as many viewers and listeners may know, agriculture, broadly speaking, the industry of agriculture is both the largest industry in the world and the largest emitter of carbon in the world. If you sort of lump together all the associated transport, chemical processing, everything that's just the agriculture industry. So agriculture is our biggest sort of climate threat. And it, obviously people might also look at transportation or other things, but you can sort of make a pretty strong defense of agriculture as the biggest. It also can be the biggest net sequesterer, which is kind of like leading up to what Greg's question is. Agriculture can be transformed through regenerative agriculture to actually be completely carbon negative. Climate positive, carbon negative. That means that more carbon is sequestered into the agroecological systems than is emitted. So that's where we start to talk about two things: ecological function and ecological service. So ecosystem functions, these are things like the carbon cycle, hydrological cycle, nitrogen cycle, and having healthy function creates services. And those services are things like carbon drawdown, carbon sequestration, cleaning of water, maintenance of biodiversity, all of these services that are essentially what in sort of classical economics are considered public goods, or these things that we don't currently place monetary value on, so they end up as market failures. Or that is to say that businesses, in competing with one another, externalize costs and actually degrade those public goods, and they end up eroding soil, they end up carbonizing, oxidizing carbon and decreasing ecosystem function. So that's sort of some framing. And so one of the ways that people are responding is actually creating markets for ecosystem services to re-internalize those costs. Those are things like carbon markets, water markets, and markets for biodiversity.
Cool. Can you talk, so if you think about a farmer, say his farmer is farming corn in the Midwest somewhere, they obviously have these really simple supply chains set up for taking the corn to the market and to making the soda or the corn products and so forth. Can you talk, it sounds like regenerative agriculture is logistically a really difficult thing to do. And so I'd like to have you talk a little bit about Regen Network and the ways that you'll use blockchains and satellite data to kind of assist in that process of taking this very kind of simple million acres of corn and convert it into this area that has lots of different species of plants and is more friendly to animals, more friendly to wildlife, captures more carbon and so forth. So yeah, if you could.
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of moving pieces there. And so I'll just be specific about the piece of the puzzle that Regen Network is focused on right now, which is the monitoring, verification, and quantification of ecosystem services. So what we're focused on is being able to make a claim about a particular parcel of land that's scientifically robust and tells us how much carbon was sequestered or emitted through the course of the agriculture that took place. And so we use satellite information, we use farmer records, we integrate with third-party auditing or existing extension agents, etc., to sort of compile and create a verification system so that if a farmer takes the risk associated with shifting out of the sort of agrochemical industrial way of doing things to one that is optimizing for soil health, we can quantify the ecosystem services they're providing to the larger community, and businesses and governments can participate in essentially valuing that public good that's being generated. So the big challenge for farmers in transitioning is risk, right? And the risks, it's interesting because there's a whole lot of complex and perverse incentives at play in our system due to the way that subsidies, crop insurance, and as you were noting, just sort of like the supply chain actually work to sort of make it kind of hard for a lot of farmers to transition. So our goal is to make it possible for farmers to actually accrue an extra income stream for the climate benefit they take by incurring the risk of transition. And that actually aligns stakeholders, because if you can value the ecosystem services that are generated through the transition, you can bring investment on board, you can align company interests, because a lot of companies now have climate pledges, and so they want to see their scope 3 emissions being reduced or turned into carbon credits, right? And so if you can kind of align all of these complex stakeholders with a single goal, which in the case of like a cornfield, that single goal is going to be something like soil health. Is the health of the soil being maintained or improved, which is directly correlated to the carbon content of that soil, and that content can be quantified and used to sort of do carbon accounting.
So if we do this work, then we're capturing more carbon, we're creating more opportunities for wildlife, we're just essentially making it a better place to be and a better part of our,
And actually, after 3 years, yields restabilize and start to increase in the case of corn. You reduce downstream flooding risk because there's higher water retention. There are all of these direct economic benefits that stakeholders accrue, but there's a time period where there's sort of risk and some yield decrease. And so you really need to incentivize and reward the sort of like common good benefits that take place through crossing over that sort of valley, right?
Awesome. Well, we're a little bit out of time here, so thank you so much for jumping on the call today and doing this work in general. I think it's super interesting to create these incentives to change our agriculture so that it really serves our needs better. Thanks again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Greg.
All right,
Cheers.
have a great one.